So for our last lesson here, in chapter 2, we're going to be looking at chemical reactions and enzymes. So remember, enzymes are proteins that are made of the monomer amino acids. And all of these chemical reactions in our body are driven by these proteins, enzymes, in order to make them fast enough for life to exist. So what we're going to look at here is what happens to chemical bonds during chemical reactions. How do energy change affect whether a chemical reaction will occur, and what role do enzymes play in living things and what affect their function? So what happens to chemical reactions or chemical bonds during a chemical reaction? So chemical reactions involve the change in the chemical bonds. And these chemical bonds that join atoms together. So again, when a chemical reaction occurs, these bonds get rearranged and the atoms change positions. So a chemical reaction is a process that changes or transforms one set of compounds into another. So one time I saw this done as like a chemical reaction like this. So, it could be something as simple as A plus B. So chemical A plus chemical B is going to form chemical AB, the combination of those two things together. Or it could be where some of the stuff kind of flip-flops place. So if I have chemical AB plus chemical CD, we could then get chemicals that kind of change places. So again, this is kind of how this works, where we're changing parts, where they're rearranging the bonds. So when we have a chemical reaction, we have two things. We have reactants and products. So the reactants are elements or compounds that enter into the chemical reaction. So things that enter, things that we start with are reactants. Okay. Products, just like a product in a multiplication product or problem, products are elements or compounds produced by the chemical reaction. So if we look at here, this stuff right here, those are going to be our reactants, what we start with in the chemical reaction. What we finish with or what we produce are our products. So again, that is the gist of a simple chemical reaction. So when we're talking about energy and reactions, how does energy change affect whether a chemical reaction will occur? So whenever chemical bonds are formed or broken, energy is released or absorbed. Now, chemical reactions that release energy often occur on their own. And another name for when they occur on their own is spontaneously, meaning they are going to occur without any input of energy. Spontaneous means that they are just going to do it. So this would be when energy is released as heat, light, or even sound. Again, energy is released. So again, we don't need an input of energy to start this. They occur spontaneously. Now, chemical reactions that absorb energy require a source of energy to start. They need an input of energy in order for the reaction to occur. So this reaction is unlikely to occur until that energy is met. So once that energy is added, the chemical reaction can occur. it takes an input, whether it's heat, whether it is a force, friction, whatever it could be. Now, what are some energy sources? Now, every form of life must have a source of energy so that it can carry out chemical reactions. In plants, they get their energy from the sunlight. So think about photosynthesis, right? Photosynthesis, these plants are absorbing sunlight and they are allowing those chemical reactions to occur. Now, in animals, we get our energy by consuming other plants or animals, by eating our food. So the energy that is produced from consuming our food, like heterotrophs, again, is how we start chemical reactions. So in a chemical reaction, this input of energy or this energy hill that we need to overcome to start it is called the activation energy. And this is the energy that is needed to get a reaction started. So in order to activate, it needs to have this input of energy in order for the chemical reaction to occur. So if we look at this figure of 2.22, right? Activation energy, the peak of each graph represents the energy needed for the reaction to go forward. The difference between the required energy and the energy of the reactants is the activation energy. So if we look here, if the amount of energy we have in our reactants is right here, and the amount of energy that is needed for the products is there. The activation energy is this amount of energy in order to overcome that hump for the chemical reaction to occur. So think of this as, like a balance, right? You have one side of the balance has all the weight on it, okay? And in order for you to get that weight back up, you got to start adding stuff or counterweights, right? And you add until eventually it peaks over the top and the chemical reaction occurs. So sometimes it's not nearly as much, right? You can see it's small there when the reactants have more energy than the products. But you can see the activation energy is the energy required for the chemical reaction to overcome that initial hump. So let's talk about enzymes. Now, what role do enzymes play in living things and what affect their function? So some chemical reactions that are essential for life would happen so slowly, require such high activation energy that they can never take place on their own. So chemical reactions are made possible by a catalyst, a substance that speeds up chemical reactions. So they speed up the rate at which a chemical reaction occurs. And again, they do this by lowering the activation energy. So remember, the activation energy is the energy that is required to start the chemical reaction. So when you lower that activation energy, it causes the chemical reaction to occur faster. So a catalyst is the term for something that speeds up the rate of the reaction. An enzyme is the catalyst of living things. So when you refer to a catalyst, it is a kind of catch-all term. Enzymes are only catalysts that are found in living organisms. So enzymes are biological catalysts, and most enzymes are proteins. So in the last section, we were talking about how proteins affect the rate of chemical reaction. So here is why or what does it. So the role of an enzyme is to speed up chemical reactions that take place in cells. So again, they can occur fast enough to allow life to occur. So the lower activation energy that occurs because of this has a dramatic effect on how quickly the reaction is completed. And again, this is very specific. All right. In other words, enzymes are like a key and a lock, right? Only one key is going to open up the lock. So it's specific to one chemical reaction. So they're very specific and only catalyzes one kind of chemical reaction. In other words, they are doing one job. And the name of the enzyme is usually related to the reaction it catalyzes. So when you talk about enzymes, right, usually enzymes end in ase, right? So lactase breaks down the molecule lactose or from milk. All right. So if you're lactose intolerant, you lack this enzyme. So again, ACE is the ending that kind of describes what it's breaking down. So now notice how the addition of the enzyme lowers this activation energy in this reaction. So if you look here, right, here is our pathway without an enzyme, right? Now, again, if you look here, it needs more energy in order to overcome that. So, but when you add an enzyme, right, you notice that that activation energy is lower, which means it takes less energy to start that chemical reaction. So lower activation energy is going to equal faster reaction. When you have a higher activation energy, it's going to be a slower reaction. So again, that is the idea here that we're looking at. These enzymes make reactions fast enough for life to exist. Now, enzymes reduce the energy that is needed by providing sites where the reactants can be brought together. In other words, it creates a perfect space for the chemical reaction to occur, which is how the activation energy is lowered. So together, this is called the enzyme substrate complex. And again, the substrates are the reactants in an enzyme reaction. So the substrate is what is getting broken down. Now, the active site is where the chemical reaction occurs. It's where the substrate binds to the enzyme. So again, with this active site, one of the more popular ones that we look at is called the lock and key model, right? Where it is a perfect fit, where the substrate perfectly fits into the active site. So if we look at a figure 2.24, this is carbonic anhydrase, which is breaking down carbon dioxide. And it binds with both substrates carbon dioxide and water. So the substrate react to form carbonic acid. So as we're looking through here, notice we have water coming in, we have carbon dioxide. So what those are is those are our reactants. That is what we are starting with in this chemical reaction. So again, the substrate binds the enzyme and it binds the enzyme at the active site. Okay. So that we have now created the enzyme substrate complex, which is perfect for the chemical reaction to occur. So what this does is it lowers the activation energy. And by lowering the activation energy, the substrates are then converted into products. So right here is what we produce. That is our product in this chemical reaction. So the product is released and the carbonic acid goes. Now, what is important is the enzyme can be reused. So it can be reused and sent back into the chemical reaction. So again, they don't get consumed from the chemical reaction. They are used over and over and over again. And if there is enough enzymes, the reaction can continue to occur at a very fast speed. Now, there are some things that affect enzyme activity. So anything that changes the structure of a protein can change the shape of the active site. So think about it. When, if your lock on your house gets melted by a fire, your key's no longer going to open it. The same thing happens with an enzyme. If it changes shape, it will not work. So this changing of shape is called denature. So the enzyme is denatured. A denatured change is the active site and causes the enzyme not to work. So some things that denature enzymes are high temperature. So this would be like when you go home and on a nice Saturday, you're going to make a fried egg or a sunny side up egg, right? As you crack an egg into a hot pan, that heat will actually denature the enzymes that are found in the chicken egg. And which is why the egg yolks and the egg whites, the whites, obviously, they start clear, they turn white. What you're looking at there is the enzymes in that egg whites denaturing. The other thing that will do that is low pH. So low pH or something that is acidic is also going to denature the proteins. So if you ever have ceviche where you cook a raw fish with acid, you're watching the enzymes and the proteins in that fish break down, and you cook it not with heat, but with acid. The same thing. When you're cooking a piece of meat, you're denaturing the proteins in there, which is why it changes its shape. So enzymes activity can be changed or turned on and off by molecules that carry chemical signals. So when you need a specific enzyme, chemical signals are sent out that allows the body to know we need these enzymes to be activated. So again, your body controls when the enzymes are doing their job, when they are slowing down. But again, enzymes activate or activity can be changed by our body. And again, chemical signals are what perform that. So hopefully this helps you out with lesson number 4. Don't forget, if you are in class, that you need to answer the end of lesson questions. Okay. So again, hopefully this helps you out. Again, this is 2.4 chemical reactions.